Hello. Randy's gonna put in the comments that that the audio's good. All right, we have an awesome topic today. Today we're going to talk about, do I need an operating agreement for my LLC? And I am unreasonably excited about that one. So gather round, business builders. I get this question a lot, and today I'm going to talk about why we care about this, what it is, and give you some ground rules to figure out whether you need one, whether you want help from somebody to get one, and if maybe you're okay where you're at, right? So here we go. Now, if you have an LLC already, at some point somebody may have asked you about an operating agreement. And the operating agreement is the document that sets the ground rules for your LLC. Now, if you don't have an LLC or you're trying to figure out if you need an LLC, that's a different video. We'll put the link in the replay for that video that talks about whether you need an LLC for your business. But let's say you've got one already. There are some questions you can ask yourself about how you want to use your LLC and who's working with you in your business that'll help you know whether you want one of these things. I'm Angie from Happy at Law. I've spent 27 years now working with businesses of all kinds and sizes, big Fortune 500 corporate companies, solo entrepreneurs, everybody in between, and all kinds of businesses, right? So here's what we're going to talk about today. I want you to think of your operating agreement as the ground rules for the business, right? And sometimes I say to people that the operating agreement is the business prenup in case you have a bad business breakup with business partners. And so that's really the first question you want to ask yourselves. Um, does your LLC have multiple members, or might you want to take on a member one day? The LLC agreement is where you find the rules that say for your business how that would happen. And so when we think about bad business breakups, the first place we're going to look is the operating agreement if one exists. It's going to tell you things like who can vote on something, what decisions get made by a simple majority, or what decisions have to have everybody basically agree. When you think about long term business relationships and being in business with somebody, it's um, it's not necessarily a predictor whether you have another relationship with that person, right? A spouse, a sibling, a parent or child, a cousin, a friend. And I heard one entrepreneur one time, right before the business went sideways, say, "Oh, I trust this person with my life." And I thought that's a pretty good way to describe it, because by putting all of your financial security and the results of your efforts in the same bucket with somebody else, you sort of have entrusted them with your life, at least your business and financial life. So that decision to enter into business with somebody can be very personal. It can be surprisingly emotional, but it also needs to be logical and thought through. And you need to know how that person is going to relate to you in the business. Can you guys work together, kind of a thing? So those are some things that we think about that provide the context for this operating agreement that is going to set the ground rules for how the owners of the business are going to relate to each other, which sort of brings us to one of the you could mental checklist items of whether you need one of these things, right? Do you have a co-owner, or do you operate your business as an army of one? And in the "Do you need an LLC" video, we talk about the pros and cons of creating an LLC versus being a sole proprietor. So if you're in business with somebody and you've created the LLC, you're going to want to document the ground rules for how you guys relate to each other and operate the business. um, let's see. What's the financial skin in the game for each party? It's pretty common in what I would say smaller businesses for somebody to bring money and somebody to bring expertise. I had some family members years ago where the parents took all of their retirement and invested in the asphalting business, and the younger generation provided the management and the know-how and operated the business, and that worked pretty well for them for a while. That business ultimately hit some market factors and some things out of their control, and we might use them as an example for another one of these considerations. Um, all right, so when you think about who you're going to be in business with, um, how long are you planning to be in this business together? That's something you might want to think about. Do you need an operating agreement or not? Are you in this for the long haul, or are you just doing a specific project, right? If you're going to be in a project and then sell it or wrap it up, or it's a short term kind of deal, you might want an operating agreement that says how you come together in the business and how you exit. Are you going to sell? Are you going to wind it up? Are you going to pass it off to the kids like the wedding china and the Hummel figurines, right? Do the kids want it? What happens to it if the kids don't want it? These are things you can address in your operating agreement, because one of the important pieces is, how do you buy and sell those membership interests, right? So let's say you've come together, you've got a co-owner, you and your co-owner are members of this LLC, and one of you wants to bring in a kid. Oh, I'll sell out of my half, right? Should you get to approve whether they sell 10% of the business to their knucklehead kid who just flunked out of college or whatever, right? Do you want to say in that? Those are the kinds of things that an operating agreement will cover. Let's say they want to sell their share or part of their share of the business to someone who's a stranger. Do you want to be in business with some person you just met, right? Or do you want approval of that sale? Maybe you don't mind if the kid comes into the business or the third party comes into the business, but maybe you'd rather just buy them out yourself. Like, what's the formula for that price, right? What's the mechanism? How much notice do you get that you could buy the business before they're allowed to sell to somebody else? Things like that. Um, Here's the other thing that I want you to think through when you've got a co-owner in your LLC, and things you might want to address in the operating agreement. The other owner is a human being, and human beings sometimes get sick. They have accidents and become incapacitated. They get older and maybe they don't have their full mental faculties, right? They get divorced. They become drug addicts or alcoholics. They can just make bad financial choices in other areas that can affect you. They get a crazy ex spouse. They get sick, right? What do you want to happen to their part of the business if those certain things happen, right? How do you want that interest to get divided up or get sold off, or do you want the right to buy it? So we want to address those human frailties as part of the operating agreement. And we don't think it'll happen, but I've seen it happen. I was talking to some business owners over the summer. Long-time professional relationship, mutual respect on all sides. Business is going great until it wasn't. And then one of the co-owners started to behave a little erratically, started spending money without talking to the other owners, stopped following through on commitments, um, cost the other members, the other co-owners, a lot of money out of pocket, and possibly related to a relapse from long-time sobriety, right? Started drinking, started acting crazy. So, how do you want to have the ability to manage that situation, right? Those are things you can address in an operating agreement. Um, all right, let's look at what else is on my list, what I want you guys to consider. Financial, okay. And so, another important section of an operating agreement when you've got a co owner is, how are you going to operate administratively the business, right? Like, oh, admin kind of boring, right? But you're going to need to have meetings to make decisions to make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. So in my example I just gave you, where one member was out spending money like it was, going out of style, they had they didn't have the operating agreement provisions in place to adjust that behavior like they could have, right? They needed some voting rights, they needed some ways to slow this person down. So you want to have provisions that talk about whether the business can spend certain amounts of money. What's the biggest dollar amount you would be comfortable your co-owner spending without talking to you? That's the kind of stuff you put in your operating agreement. What's the biggest amount of money you would be comfortable with them spending without having a formal management committee meeting and minutes and a decision and a process around that, right? $10,000, $100,000. And this can go for spending money or borrowing money, right? Or bringing in another owner. So you want to have rules around who can make that decision and why. When can meetings happen? Can they call a meeting at 4 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast when you're in California? And suddenly the meeting happened because they own 51%, right? They've got a majority. Or do you want them to have to give you certain kinds of notice? Now, there's state statutes that give requirements depending on what state you're in, but ground rules, right? We're talking about ground rules for the relationship. And then how are changes to the operating agreement itself made? Can you adjust the operating agreement to bring in another party, right? Maybe you've got an employee or a contractor who's been doing tremendous work for your business, and you think, gosh, it really makes more sense to bring them in as a second or third member rather than paying them. And they like that idea. They want to share in the upside. The operating agreement and the rules for the management committee meetings are how you make sure that happens in a way where everybody's heard, everybody knows what they're getting into, and the decisions are documented appropriately, right? So ground rules, ground rules. The other thing you can think about when you're thinking, do I want an operating agreement? Do I need one? What do I want in it? I want you to think about exit plan, right? Every business ends. It ends with quitting, bankruptcy, selling, and stopping, right? Uh, so, how do you expect the business to end? Not everybody is going to be able to sell their business for a multiple of their annual revenue. Kind of depends on what sort of business it is. But your business may have assets that make sense to sell if you ever decide to stop running that business, right? You might have an email list. You might have a social media account that you would want to hand off to somebody else. You might have assets like maybe you've got a special bit of software code that's really useful. Maybe you've got a client list. You may have things that you own that have value that you don't necessarily recognize as being assets of the business. And one of the things that we do when we're doing a business glow up is we look at what have you created that is an asset, right? And that's even when we do the year long Happy at Law Network, when we take people through the progression of their business and get their contract templates and all of that in place. One of the tasks we go through is, what do you own? How is it protected? Are we doing that the way we want to do it, right? Is there a better way? Um, all right. And then let's see if we covered everything. Um, yeah. So when you think about whether you need an operating agreement, and you're an army of one, it's just you. Sometimes, if you want to do certain things, you want to borrow money, you want to, show that you have revenue, things like that. Sometimes they will ask for a copy of your operating agreement, and there are pretty straightforward forms you can use in that situation, but just keep in mind whatever's in there is what you're going to be stuck with if your spouse runs off with the milkman, right? Or milk delivery, or do we have those still? If your spouse runs off, if you become injured, if your family member needs to inherit the business, there may be things you want to address in that operating agreement. So there may be circumstances where you still want to have one of these, even if it's just you. But if you have any other person who is a co-owner of your business, I think you're gonna want one. So you can set those ground rules the way you want them and not the default ground rules in the state laws, right? So think of it like the difference between having a prenup versus getting divorced without a prenup. It's not that there aren't rules to divide up all the stuff, it's just that the rules in the statutes, the default rules apply to your splitting up, dividing everything up, as opposed to what you negotiated that you believed would be fair, right? Going into that relationship. You can also think of the operating agreement like part of your, the way you would think about a will, right? It's not that your stuff isn't going to be divided up. It's that either the state decides how it's done or you get to decide how it's done and who gets what. So think about it in those terms. It makes a lot more sense. Um, there are varying costs for doing this kind of thing. Depending on how DIY you are, there are resources you can find out on the internet. I personally don't think there is yet an AI tool I've seen that will create legal documents that are good enough to use without professional second look at it, just to make sure it matches up with your goals. Like, the document itself might be okay, but does it match what you actually meant to do? That's the real risk that I'm seeing in a lot of contracts and legal documents that are AI created right now. So keep that in mind. You can get pretty far by yourself if you are um, ready to get some expert help. We have some resources. I'll put some links in the description for you after we're done here today. So if you have questions about this, put it in the chat. Like and subscribe. We'll keep doing these live streams with questions that you have about your business and how all this legal stuff works. Right? It's weird and scary and confusing, and lawyers use weird vocabulary and say it depends all the time, and why do they do weird stuff? And I'm here to help you navigate that and understand how it works so your business can be powerful, you can be powerful in your business, and be really successful. So that is, do you need an operating agreement for your LLC?